without much doubt, the ANC vote is now going to depend more and more on duress, basically people being threatened by their chiefs or by other people in their squatter camps, wherever, or on bribery and threats of, if you don't vote for us, you lose your pension or you lose your social grant or whatever, you know.
Is the ANC at its weakest point ever? I posed this question to R.W. Johnson in a recent episode of my podcast, Solutions with David Ansara. What follows is a short extract from our longer conversation. You can watch the full interview that's linked in the description below. Enjoy. So you know a thing or two about the ANC. What do you make of the current state of the organization? It seems to be at its weakest moment in its history. What do you make of
I think, no, I don't think that's true. Look, people forget that the ANC was very weak from its foundation through until after the Second World War. It was an organization counting for very little in that period. It really began to take off only after the Second World War, and particularly well into the 50s. It wasn't until at least the middle 50s that it began to take off. And one of your oldest and most faithful partners in race relations, Jill
Wenzel,
Wenzel, yeah. Now, Jill is an old Liberal Party, old stager, and she will tell you that in the middle 50s, that when Mandela would call a strike for the ANC, he would come along to her and her husband saying, please, could the Liberal Party put its weight behind this in Soweto, because they then were a much bigger, stronger organization than the ANC, okay? The white Liberal Party had more supporters in Soweto than they did. Now, that gives you some idea of just how weak it was. It really mushroomed only in the late 50s and the 60s, the early 60s. And of course, it was then, because they then went over to armed struggle, which was a complete mistake and disaster, they then got nipped in the bud, as it were. So then they were mainly an exile organization until very late on. So to say they're at their weakest now actually isn't historically true, but of course they are at their weakest in the modern period, starting again in 1990. They haven't been this weak before. And I think they're continuing to decline. And that, 2 points about that really. One is that, you know, the whole idea of the ANC was to bring together the disparate and squabbling, essentially tribal groups, in which chiefs played a very large part. And that was seen as a very difficult thing to achieve. And of course, you can now see just why that was, because it has fallen back into factionalism very much. And I think that is, frankly, a truthful depiction of the realities of Black society in South Africa. It is not naturally a united organization or a united community at all. And actually, I would expect the factionalism to get worse rather than better. If I've just been talking to someone from Zimbabwe, and she was saying to me, you know, that ZANU-PF, that the factionalism has just got steadily worse and worse and worse, so that now, instead of 2 factions, there are about 5, and that it's just endemic and it just carries on getting worse, basically. And I think that what was exceptional was the period of militant struggle when they had one overwhelming charismatic leader, initially Lutuli and later on Mandela. And that was the exceptional period. And we are now in what is, in a sense, much more normal. And I don't think they will easily go back from where they are now to where they were before.
And it's not very politically fashionable to discuss the role of tribalism in the ANC's internal factional disputes. Is often the way that it's portrayed is around personalities, Jacob Zuma versus Ramaphosa or Ace Magashule, whoever it might be. But there does seem to be these kind of lingering underlying tensions and these schisms along tribal lines.
look, it's ridiculous that fashion should play any role in this. And we have to go with what's real. And of course, factionalism is not by any means always tribal, but there is no doubt whatsoever that, when Mbeki and Mandela were in charge, that there was a Xhosa predominance within the upper ranks of the ANC, which is still there at civil servant level, and that when Zuma came in, that you had a Zulu predominance. And that the whole point about the Ramaphosa period is he does not have a big vendor following. He's on his own, he's isolated. Therefore, he's very weak. Therefore, he temporizes, he delays, he hesitates because he has no real backing of that sort. And that it's quite clear that that still plays a very fundamental role. And that, and moreover, I mean, I think it was Mbeki who pointed out that almost every minister who came in immediately swapped his director general for someone from his own tribal grouping. I mean, this is just reality, whether you like it or not. I don't care whether it's fashionable or not to call it a spade, but it is. But there are other sorts of factions as well, as we know. I mean, ideological ones. But the real problem is that it's not going away. But on top of that, an analogy I used recently in a talk I gave is in 1961 in the Soviet Union, Khrushchev announced that soon the next generation would see in the arrival of communism. And in 20 years, that the Soviet Union would transit from being a socialist society to being a communist one, which was seen as meaning an era of abundance and in everything, and when all the problems would be sorted out, and indeed the state would begin withering away, as Marx had predicted. Now, Brezhnev then came in and said, no, we're going to stay a socialist society. But it was a bit late. People had got this idea. And when the early 80s rolled around, they looked around, and of course, there were queues everywhere and shortages, and the people in power were not achieving very much, and the economy had ceased to grow. And they looked and realized that, all of this is nonsense, and that actually it ain't like that at all. And that was a very key thing because it delegitimized the system. They realized, look, our politicians are very ordinary people, and they're telling us a lot of fibs, and it's not at all like that. And this is just not true. And I think it's no accident that within a few years, Gorbachev came along and, things were just falling to bits by then. Now, I think something similar, we've reached a similar stage of the ANC. After all these more than 25 years of saying a better life for all, people are looking around saying, well, it's not a better life for all, it's actually worse for most people. And unemployment has more than quadrupled since the ANC came in, and poverty and inequality are much worse than they used to be. And that this is actually not as good as the apartheid society that preceded it in many key respects. Education's worse, public hospitals are worse, the roads have got more potholes, the electricity doesn't work, and so on and so forth. And I think in the same sense that what is happening at mass level is this process of delegitimation. And it's undoubtedly going on, and it is proceeding. It hasn't by any means finished yet. It's most advanced in the urban areas, but it is seeping into the rural areas too. And without much doubt, the ANC vote is now going to depend more and more on duress, basically people being threatened by their chiefs or by other people in their squatter camps, wherever, or on bribery and threats of, if you don't vote for us, you lose your pension or you lose your social grant or whatever, and that sort of thing is going on already, but they are going to become more and more dependent on it. So that is where we're at now.
Thanks for watching. I'm keen to hear from you, our audience. Leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. Also, if you would like to watch the full interview with R.W. Johnson, that's linked over here. You can also subscribe to my other channel that's linked over here. My name is David Ansara. Until next time, take care.